Hello and welcome to the brand new Ultimate Beginner's Guide to Cities Skylines 2. I'm rebooting this series because the Economy 2.0 patch made such foundational changes to the entire game that I think it's important that we start from the beginning so that I can discuss what you need to do to found a flourishing city with a positive budget. So in this series, I'll teach you the mechanics of the game, show you how to plan a realistic city, and explain how you make money. Because without money, you won't get very far. And this will be a completely vanilla series with the exception of the map, which we will select from Paradox mods. So this means that whether or not you're playing on a PC or in the future on a console, you'll be able to build along with me. I'll try to keep this series very organized and predictable. We'll found a small town and build this thing into a massive metropolis over time. And I'll build slowly and try to show you exactly what I'm doing so that you can build along with me if you'd like to. So in this episode, we'll start from the very beginning. We'll select our map and build a small city that will be sustainable over the long term. This means that we'll have all the services that you'd expect to see in a small town, and our budget will be positive by the end of the episode. And if you're excited for this guide, hit the like button and subscribe so you won't miss out on any future episodes in this series. And without any further ado, let's jump right in. The first decision that you're presented with in Cities Skylines 2 is quite possibly the most consequential decision that you're going to make the entire time you play the game. And that is, what map are you going to build on? Now, the reason why this is so important is your map is going to really dictate the story that you can tell with your build and the kind of build that you're going to have. And there are certain decisions that you're going to make right now that you can't undo easily without the use of mods. So things such as the climate, the hemisphere, and the natural resources are not modifiable outside of map selection. By default, Cities Skylines comes with 10 maps, and if you've pre-ordered, you'll get the San Francisco and Tomperay maps as well. Now, the reason I don't want to build on one of these maps is that I really don't like the resource distribution of the vanilla maps. You'll notice that there's not very much fertile ground on this map, and that is a theme throughout all of the maps. So let's go to Paradox mods and find a great custom map to build on. Now, the very first thing I want to do is start a new playset. So I'll click on Playsets and create new playset. I'll name it Ultimate Beginner's Guide and click Create. Now I'm going to browse for a map. I'm going to narrow this down by clicking on Maps. Now from here you will see lots of excellent maps, but I already know the map that I want to build on, and it's this one right here by Panlop Palms. This is a map of Samui Island in Thailand, and it is an absolutely beautiful map. Like I mentioned, this was created by Panlop Palms, who is the creator behind the Palms Time YouTube channel, and they use this map to demonstrate how to create realistic looking beaches. I'll leave a link to that video in the video description if you want to check it out. And now that the map is installed, we are ready to head back to New Game and select Custom Maps, select the map, and we can name our city here. And then we have a number of options that we can go through. So we have the theme. So you can currently choose from North American or European. Setting the theme here will impact what your default buildings are, your service vehicles, your roads, your road signs, and your traffic lights. And you can't change it after the fact. So make sure that you get this right the first time. Obviously, you can use whatever buildings you want afterwards, but those overall road design elements and the service vehicles, you can't change those. There are a few more options here, but the most interesting ones are Unlock All, which unlocks all buildings, Unlimited Money, which gives you unlimited money, and Unlock Map Tiles, which unlocks all 529 tiles and removes tile upkeep. Just know that if you use any of those options, achievements will also be disabled. We're going to play with all of these set to the defaults, so let's begin a new game. And here we are in our city for the very first time, and it is incredibly tempting to just start building, but I want to encourage you to take a step back, analyze the map a bit, and plan things out. First and foremost, I want to let you know that even though you're being encouraged to build a city right here, you don't necessarily have to do that. You just have to build where you have transportation access. So if we wanted to build our city over here to begin, we could definitely do that. That said, cities would probably develop where it's easiest to build, and that would be in an area that's relatively flat. So we want to take a look at our contour lines and our terrain to figure that out. To do that, go to Roads and then toggle your contour lines. Now with the contour lines, the closer contour lines are to one another, the steeper the terrain. So that's why right here on this mountainside, the contour lines are really close together. A couple of interesting things about contour lines. This white contour line right here, that is sea level. Second, these dark contour lines are exactly 10 meters apart. So if you see these dark contour lines close to one another, you can tell that the area is incredibly steep. So looking at our contour lines, it seems like this area right here is really prime for development, as is the area on the other side of this little stream right here. Now that we've got a lay of the terrain, we should take a look at natural resource locations. And the main reason for that is I want to prevent development where natural resource extraction can take place. It's really important to think about that because if you're able to extract resources locally, it means that all the goods that are produced locally are cheaper and all of your buildings will level up faster. Your factories will have more profit, your citizens will have more money. And new for the Economy 2.0 world, we can actually place some extractors right off the bat. So to find those, we click on zoning and then go over to specialized industry. And there are 4 that we can place right away. Those include livestock farming, grain farming, forestry, and stone mining. Now, interestingly, stone mining and livestock farming can occur anywhere, so we don't really have to think about land fertility for either of those. But for grain farming, vegetable farming, and textile farming, those can only occur in places that have high land fertility. And for coal mining and ore mining, those can only occur in places that have ore available. And for oil, obviously there has to be oil in the ground. So to take a look at that, we'll head up to our info views and then click on natural resources. And you can see that this is kind of a messy view. We have all of the natural resources available all at once. So I'd highly encourage you to deselect anything that you don't want to see right away. So right now we're only seeing areas that have wood. Wood's an interesting one because it's the only natural resource that you can place on your own. So I wouldn't worry about this all that much unless you're trying to have a lumber industry that is occurring in an old growth forest. Otherwise, you can place and plant your own trees and it's relatively easy to do so. Next, we have land fertility. And again, these are the areas that we can farm in. Now, I'm noticing that along the river, we have high land fertility and it's really fertile right here, the area that they kind of encourage you to develop in. Next, we have oil deposits, and you can see that there isn't really much in terms of oil on the map, though if you zoom in, you can see that this area right here has a bit of oil, and it looks like there is some over here as well. So this might be a resource that we want to try to extract, or it could be one that we decide to import because the industry wouldn't be all that productive. And then our final resource is ore. And interestingly, ore counts for both general ore and coal. So if you want to have both of those extraction industries in your city, you're going to need 2 locations for this. And then finally, I'd like to take a look at the industrial suitability. And this is mainly because I want to see where the groundwater deposits are and the way that the wind is blowing. So for groundwater deposits, if you plan on extracting groundwater for drinking water, you can't have your industry anywhere near it because it will pollute the groundwater deposit. And you can see that there's groundwater all over the place. And all of these deposits seem to be touching, which means that if we have industrial near one of these, it'll likely pollute all the groundwater. But potentially the more important consideration is wind speed and direction. And that's because we can have the air pollution blow over our city if we don't plan appropriately. So one thing I'm noticing is that if we were to build our industry right here, the pollution would actually blow over the river and completely avoid this area right here, which is likely going to be a great spot to build our city. It also gives me a lot of confidence in building some of our extractors right here, as well as back here, considering that the pollution from these industries and extractors will go nowhere near our citizens. And after looking at all of this, there's one more thing I want to talk about, and that is the story of this city. And I want this to be kind of a rural community that grew up over time into a tourism mecca. So I want to build slow, I want to have lots of industry, and as the place becomes wealthier, we'll start to build some massive tourist infrastructure. So with all of that in mind, let's begin laying out our roads. So our roadway layout is not just one layout, it's actually 3. One for our community, one for our industrial area, and one for our specialized industry. And in this section of the video, I want to focus on the layout for the community itself. So our community layout is going to be based upon a grid, or rather, multiple grids that come together organically and work with the terrain, because we want to respect the topography if we can. Now, I'm guessing a few of you are thinking, an American planner that wants to build a grid. What a surprise! And here's the thing, I get it. But just in defense of the grid, the reason why grids are great is they're excellent for wayfinding, they're very logical, they make expansion very easy, and they're not American. They've actually been around for millennia. You can find them all across the globe. Whether you look in ancient China, ancient India, North Africa, the Middle East, ancient Mexico, or even in Europe, the grid is found everywhere. In fact, it's even been said that the American grid was influenced by the Roman centurion grid, so I guess the United States has Europe to thank for its grids. In the previous Ultimate Beginner's Guide to Cities Skylines 2, we explored a variety of grids and talked about the pros and the cons of grids of a variety of sizes. What we discovered was that smaller grids are great for pedestrian connectivity, and they offer a variety of ways to get around, which is really helpful from a traffic flow perspective. However, because the grids are small, that means that you're going to have much more pavement than a larger grid. and it also means that you're going to have many more conflict points because you'll have more intersections. Specific to the game, because the grid is small, you're going to have a difficult time placing larger buildings and some of your signature buildings. Now, that's not to say that you should go with a gigantic grid. A large grid creates its own set of problems. You're likely going to have wider roadways because you'll have fewer of them. And because the block size is so big, it's going to be very difficult to navigate on foot. And from a game standpoint, when you have a grid that's really large, you're going to have a lot of wasted space. Now, looking at these grids from the previous Ultimate Beginner's Guide made me think that maybe the Barcelona grid is perfect for our city. It seems as though it balances pedestrian connectivity and movement of vehicles really well because the size is right in the middle. So this is what we are going to explore in this city, a grid that's 112 by 112. So let's begin working on that now. As I mentioned, each of our grids is going to be based upon a coastline, so the first thing I want to do is draw a couple of coastal roads. So for this, I want to make sure that we've got our contour lines on, and then I'm going to make sure that we are at least 6 units away from the coast. The way that I can do that is by looking at the blue line, which is currently around where my mouse pointer is. That is a full 6 units from the road. So if you want to maintain that gap, just make sure that the blue line does not cross the white line, or at least doesn't cross too much. Now I'm going to switch to the simple curve tool so I can blend these two roads together. And I cut through the road so I could get a nice sweeping curve that completely follows the coast. We're going to start our grid over here, but before we do that, I'm going to advise you to hit the pause button. You can see we've got this red down arrow, and that is the trend of our budget. And that's because all the roads that we just drew require maintenance. Now, do know that any of the roads that come with your map do not require maintenance unless you upgrade or modify them. And I know that this road right here, for instance, we are going to be modifying significantly, so I'm just going to delete it right now. Now, one of the reasons that I wanted to back out this road is it would create lots of conflicts with our snapping options. And right now, we currently have everything enabled. The first option right here toggles all snapping. So if we click on this, we won't snap to anything. The second option will snap us to existing geometry. So if we have another road, we'll snap directly to that. And you can even see and feel that as we approach the road. The next option will snap to zoning cell length. So right now, if I attempt to draw a road, I can draw it any number of meters that I want. If I select this option, we'll move in increments of 8 because a zoning cell is 8 meters long. The fourth option snaps us to 90-degree angles. So if we use this in combination with snap to existing geometry, for instance, I can draw a perfect 90-degree angle from that road, and it'll snap to that as I move around. The fifth option snaps to the side of a building, and it's pretty self-explanatory. If you have a building, you'd be able to snap directly to the side of it and draw a road. The next option is snap to guidelines, and this basically gives you a guideline from any road that you've already created. And then our final option is snap to grid, and it does just that. It locks your cursor to the grid tiles on the roads that you've placed. And this can be really helpful for creating parallel roads. Now, interestingly, I find that those last two snapping options are the ones that most often trip me up, so you'll often see me building without those last two on, especially when I'm trying to make a perfect grid. But now that we've gone through all the snapping options, I'm going to draw out all of the local roads in the grid, and then we'll work on joining them before we think about roadway hierarchy. I'm also going to be using the grid tool extensively, and the best piece of advice I can give you for this tool is work in really small increments. The larger the grid you try to make, the less control that you have when you're building it. Now we need to blend these things together, and we've got a couple of options. So first and foremost, we could just run these roads directly into our new grids, and that's fine, particularly if the intersections are pretty close. This one, for instance, though, isn't all that good. So we could just add a node right here and then use our curved road tool, our simple curve, as long as we have snap to guidelines on, and try to just send this in like that. That is a completely valid way of addressing this. The other way of addressing this is just to grab a straight segment and have it be a little bit askew. That happens all the time in reality as well. Alternatively, we could do something like this. Again, totally valid. However you want to join these up is your call. I think the important thing to remember with basically all road building in Cities Skylines is that it's less a science and more an art. So things happen. There are imperfections, and you've got to be okay with that. You can't let perfect be the enemy of good. That one right there, a little off, that's character. Now, speaking of character, one thing I was thinking about as we were building over here is that we have an opportunity to have a half block instead of a full block that goes into this hillside, and maybe we could create a couplet. So now I'm starting to think a little bit about roadway hierarchy, because the couplet would be a one-way set. In fact, the way I would look at this couplet is it would carry most of our local traffic around the city and really snake north and south throughout the entire community. And you can see that things have gotten a little bit off because I had snap to guidelines on. So I'm going to have to redo a number of these roads. If I want to delete roads quickly, I can click and hold this and bring it back to where I want to delete, and I'll delete all of them all at once. And I think that we are going to have a point where we orient around our original grid. So I think that point's going to be right about here. I'm going to send a road off, and every other grid will be based upon this one now. Now, with that in mind, I also want to take our couplet and turn it so that it's parallel with this new grid. So what I'm thinking is that we'll find where this next block would be, and then I want to divide it in half, and that would be our couplet. Now, interestingly, I'm seeing that this block right here is actually 1 unit wider than it's supposed to be. So I've got a couple of options. I can either not let perfect be the enemy of good, or I can do what I'm about to do, which is make it perfect, and I will use snap to zoning grid to fix it. And the reason I wanted to get that just right is we are going to use the parallel tool to make this connection. So to toggle the parallel tool, click on this button right here, and this number right here stands for the number of units of separation between the roads. So I know I want this to be 5 units separation. That's what we have in between these roads, and then we'll draw it in place. I'm going to use the simple curve tool, and I'll join them up just like that. And that is a perfect 5 unit separation. The join is absolutely perfect. Now, I think to join these two grids together, we are going to have a simple curve. So we are going to set our starting point. We'll click once. We'll go where we want to go. We'll click again, and I have this at a perfect 90 on that road. And then I'm going to drag this in where I want it to meet up. And that's going to be this street right here. And I'll do that all the way along here. And now you can see how the grid has kind of warped to go in this direction, and I really like that. In fact, I like it so much, we may do the exact same thing right here. And there we go. That is looking very, very clean. But here's the thing, we need to think about roadway hierarchy. We've got our couplet right here. I think that we should formalize that by upgrading this. And the way that we're going to do that is we're going to add a 2-lane one-way road up and down each of these streets, and we're going to use the replace tool to make that happen. So all we have to do is click and then hold this for as long as we want this to go, which will be to right here. And then we'll let go. And you can see that there, it's now a one-way road. Now to go in the opposite direction, we're going to start from the other side and pull it down. Now we have our couplet. Now let's say you got a segment wrong. You can click, hold, and drag in the opposite direction, and it will switch directions. And now we need to figure out our major arterial through here. Now an arterial road is a road that's going to carry most of our regional traffic. So for that, we are going to use one of our medium roads, and we have one unlocked by default. It's a 4-lane road. Now, right now, this city would be cul-de-saced. We have our highway right here and our arterial coming in, but where does this go? I think that there are 2 spots it's likely going to go. One is going to be over here. Maybe we have an interchange near our industrial park, and another one is likely around this hill right over here. So with that in mind, I'm going to send our first arterial right up the center right here, and then we'll have it turn directions and head up the coast. Let's upgrade this road, and the first thing that you'll notice is that it's picking one side of the road or the other. This can be fine, particularly if you're trying to build around an existing building, but if you want it centered, what you'll have to do is select snap to zoning cell length, deselect that, and now I can select the center of the road. Now do keep in mind, this has broken up our zoning grid a bit, and there are ways that we can fix this, but it's going to happen down the line when we're actually zoning things in. Now this looks like an absolute disaster, and I'm going to show you how to fix it. So the big problem here is that we've got a whole bunch of nodes coming in together, and as I start to peel these back, you'll start to notice that this road begins to look a little bit better. Now, one thing you'll commonly come across when you join up roads the way that I'm doing it is that you'll have it look very, very janky. And the way that you can fix this is to look for the segment that is causing the problems. And in this particular instance, I can see that if I were to delete this segment using my bulldoze tool, that curve remains. So I know that that's the segment I need to get rid of. And then I'll just redraw that into place. And now it's looking good. Now, I am going to reestablish some of the roads through here, but I'm likely going to establish the north-south roads, considering this is a gigantic east-west road. Now, the last thing that we need to do for the street right here is make our bridge connection. So I will use the replace tool to upgrade this. And then I'm going to sever this right in the middle, and we'll use our curve tool along with snap to guidelines to make a really nice connection right there. And the last thing that I want to do with this grid is come up with a coastal road along the river. Now for this one, we're going to be using our continuous tool, and I want to make sure that none of my snapping options are on. And then I'm going to come up to the top right here, and what I think I will do is figure out where this road begins. And I think this is about the location. And now let's go back to our continuous tool. I have only snapping to existing geometry on. I'll find the end of the road. I'm going to click once. That establishes our start point. And now I'm going to turn this off. The next click will establish our curve point. And then our third click will create that road. Now, as long as I don't hit the right mouse button, I'm still in the continuous tool. And the next click will once again draw a road. Now, the last thing I want to do with this is add a couple of embellishments to make it feel a little bit more realistic, as well as fix some of our roadway naming issues. That's one thing that's not really well ironed out in Cities Skylines 2 right now. And you can see that we've got strange stuff like this street right here actually wrapping around and heading up this way. If we want to stop that, one way that we can do it is to create an intersection right here and send this coastal road up to another location. So I'm going to do that, and then we'll add a roundabout to the end of this. And by default, we've got a couple of roundabouts unlocked. We've got our small roundabout with a couple of decorations, so we can place that right there. I'll do the exact same thing in a couple of these other locations as well. And to round this one out, I want to bring these couplet roads together. And what I'm thinking is we are going to use our complex curve. That is our third option here. This allows us to define a start point, a middle point, a bend, and then bend it again. And I know that sounds really complicated, but it's actually not that difficult once you wrap your head around it. So we are going to make sure that we've got snap to existing geometry on because we want to snap to this new road. We'll define our start point, then where we want to bend. And I'm going to actually have to turn off snap to existing geometry right here. And I think we'll bend this about halfway through. Click on that. And then we're going to pull this down and we're finding our snapping point for this road. And I want this to bend right here. So one more click and then where we want it to go. And that is absolutely perfect. The only problem is that our directionality is wrong. So we'll just use our replace tool. And I want to make sure that all the snapping options are on so I don't inadvertently shift the road. And we'll turn it to the opposite direction. Now it does seem like our little nub right here is a little bit off. So I will use the replace tool on this. And that is 100% perfect. This road will eventually go out to our industrial area. And that right there is the bones of our city layout. And it's cost us about $150,000 and only $500 per hour. So that's one of the reasons why we were able to build such an extensive layout and really plan ahead. Now, before we load this up with zoning, let's start to think about our specialized industries. We're going to be setting up our specialized industry on the other side of the river as well as the other side of the highway. So let's start out with livestock farming. And remember, livestock farming doesn't require resources or land fertility, so I just want to make sure I'm not going to consume valuable land. And honestly, this spot here looks perfect. So when you place a specialized industry, you're going to be greeted with this little box right here. This is where the extraction actually occurs. And this little circle right here is the area from which you can extract from this extractor building. So we have all of our snapping options, and we can definitely get that set up if we want to. But what I think I'm going to do instead is focus on setting up this area, then we'll run a road to the extractor afterwards. You can always modify your extraction area after the fact, so don't feel like you're completely locked into this. And it's a good thing that I'm not locked into this because I'm not 100% satisfied with how this looks. What I'm going to do is attach a gravel road to the side of this building. So that is the snap to the side of the building option. And then I'll run that over to the road at a 90. And now I'm going to select the farm once again and click on this button right here for the area tool. And I can modify these points that I just placed. Now, one thing you might notice is that things look a little weird here with our surfaces. And this is a little bit of detailing, but if you click on your landscaping tool and go to the 4th tab, you can modify any surface in the game. So let's say you want this sidewalk to come down to the road. All you got to do is select it, and it works just like the area tool that we just used to make the farm. And there we go. A little bit of extra work, but I think it makes it look a ton better. So that's why it's fun to play with the surface tool. Now we could leave our farm just like this. It'll work just fine, but I like to decorate a little bit more to make it look a little bit more realistic. So I like to go into my landscaping tools and add a tree break. So we're going to select maybe like this hickory tree, and then I want to set the age to be a little bit older. So rather than having saplings, we'll select mature and elderly trees. And the reason I'm selecting 2 ages is that I don't want all the trees to die at once, which will happen if I have all elderly trees, for instance. I'll do the exact same thing with some oaks on the side. And then for the rest of the area around this, I'm going to select on the Place Multiple tool, and now I can place multiple trees in a location. So for this, I'm going to take my brush size really low, and we will pepper some trees back here. Now we still have our tree ages selected, and because I'm planting a dense forest, I'm going to select all of the ages. And then for the brush strength, I have this set to 50 right now, but I might take this even lower because I want to mix up the species. And if I go with a really high brush strength, I'm going to completely fill in the forest with 1 tree. And just bluntly, that's a very satisfying tool to use. And I think that looks a ton better than just leaving it as it was. And now that we have this complete, let's build a grain farm. And if I'm not mistaken, the ground right here is very fertile. So I'm going to place this in this general area. But before I do that, I want to make sure that I select the show contour lines. And that's because I knew that there was a hill right here. And if I place this incorrectly, I could end up building this on the hill and creating a whole bunch of work for myself. So what I'm thinking is I'll place it like this, and then I'm going to hit escape because I want to build a road before I actually set my surface. So for that, I'll go into my roads tool, and I have snap to the sides of the building enabled. And what I'm going to do is snap to the side of the building, and rather than drawing across the side here, I'm going to try to place it like this. Now, because that road icon is still flashing, I know that it's not accepting my placement. So I'm going to use the replace tool and try to slide this over until it's happy. And there we go. We had to place it perfectly in the center, but now it's good. So now it's just as simple as running a road right here, and I'm going to use my curved road tool to make the connection. Now let's set our area tool. And there we go. Now, just note, you don't have to completely exhaust this entire circle. I could have made 2 farms right here, whatever you want to do. In fact, there might actually be some benefit of having more extractors because some of your specialty buildings are actually locked behind having a certain number of extractors. So just keep that in mind as you're placing these. Now we've got 2 more extractor buildings available to us, the forestry industry and stone mining. Now for forestry, this is an interesting one. As we click on this, you can see all of the locations that we can place this. but we can actually place it wherever we want. Now, I kind of hinted at this in the beginning. If we want to have our own specialty forestry industry, we can do that. And I'm actually going to create one right about here. So what we're going to do is eliminate all the trees right here, and then I'm going to plant my own. So for this, I want a large brush. I'm going to take the brush strength and bump it all the way up to the top. And then for snapping, the default is to remove only the matching type. I'm going to deselect this. And now with my tool, I will remove everything in that I select. I'm doing this by holding down the right mouse button. And in a couple moments flat, I have removed every single tree. So now I want to select a tree that I'm going to plant. I'm going to plant these relatively close to one another, and I'm going to make sure that I've got a variety of ages. So I'll do rows of different aged trees. Now we'll place our extractor building. And just like our previous building, I'm going to hold off on drawing this because I want to add a local service road for this. And I'm going to use my freeform tool for this, or my continuous tool rather. And here we go. And I think that this looks outstanding. Now, one of the reasons I wanted to select different ages for the trees is trees at different ages produce different amounts of wood. So these saplings right here produce 0 wood. These young trees produce 900. And these older trees that we placed last produce 2,000. Now, the older a tree, the more wood it produces, and the maximum amount of wood that it can produce is 3,000. Now, obviously, we could clean this up even more, but ultimately, they're going to start cutting these down. And wherever they cut down a tree, it will grow back. So know that planting trees like this, it does actually work for this industry. Now, one thing to keep in mind is we had to pay to plant all these trees. So again, we're continuing to lose money. And now we have one final industry to place, and that is going to be our stone mining. So for this one, again, I don't want to overlap any of my ore or oil deposits. So I am looking at having this one right over here. And it seems like most everywhere except for right here is safe. So let's get this thing cooking. There we go. And just a little trick here, I decided to use the place multiple tool because the main point of this tree row here was to actually create a sound buffer, and I didn't want it to look completely organic. And honestly, this might look even better than the tree row that I used over here for the farm. So this is another technique that you can use. Use place multiple, use a variety of ages, and a 2-unit gap, and you can place them just like that. Now, before we're done with our specialized industry, we need to find another way across the highway. So we are going to add in a bridge across here and then across the water as well. And this will be a way that we can actually de-cul-de-sac this area at the same time. So for that, I'm going to bump this up a couple of meters. And then I'll bring it down on the other side of the water. And we're going to do the exact same thing over here. I want to find a place where I can jump over twice. And I think this is probably our best bet. And then over the top of the highway, we're actually going to need to go even higher. 6.25 says it'll work, but it's going to be really bowed. So what I'm going to actually do is 7.5 meters. And then for the center area right here to make this look natural, we're going to use our terraforming options. Now, the first terraforming option here levels everything. The second option shifts everything, so it lowers or raises it. The third option softens the terrain. And the fourth option slopes the terrain. We're going to use all of those right now. So let's get a relatively small brush size. And when you're terraforming, use a really low strength. Be patient. It'll take a little bit longer, but the result will be better. Now I'm going to use the left mouse button, and that'll raise the terrain up. The right mouse button will lower it. And that's clearly too high. What I'm going to do now is level the terrain. So I'm going to try to find the contour line that looks the same as the road over here. And it looks like this line right here is just right. So I'll right mouse click that. And now with my left mouse button, it will level to that line. I'll do the exact same thing on the other side. And now I'm going to use the slope terrain tool to slope between these two contour lines. So you right mouse click your top height and then go to your lower height and use your left mouse button to slope up to it. Now you have a perfect slope in between those two heights. Now after I set my elevation down to ground level, I should be able to make really nice connections between the two bridges. That looks much, much, much nicer. Now, I want this to look really natural, so what I'm going to do is increase my brush size, level the terrain at the top height up here, and the lower height, and we'll once again slope the terrain. And now we'll use the soften terrain tool at a much smaller brush size and go along the edge and smooth things out. And now it looks as though we've built this up, which is a much more natural way of doing this. The last thing you'd want is to have a bunch of bridge spans for no reason. And that is all linked up. And now the de-cul-de-sac the area. We've done that, and we are now good. Now, one more thing you might want to do is make the bridges look a little bit more interesting. And if you want to do that, pop back into your road tool, and we've got the 2-lane wooden covered bridge. We can use the replace tool to add this. There we go. I really like that a lot. I think that looks nice. And if we want to build the other specialized industries, we'll have to wait till they unlock. They unlock between milestone 1 and milestone 4. Now let's switch gears and build some of our utilities. Though there are many utilities in the game, we only need 3 to get our city off the ground: water, power, and sanitary sewer. Now for each of those, our options are relatively limited, so let's go through them. For power, we've got 3 options at the beginning. We can either import power by placing a transformer station, and this option only works if you have a high voltage line at the edge of your map tile, and we don't have one in this map. We've also got a wind turbine, and we've got a small coal power plant. The base cost of the wind turbine is about a quarter of that of the small coal power plant, and that makes sense because it produces about a quarter of the power. But that's only telling part of the story. The wind turbine doesn't have employees, so the overall upkeep is a lot less, and it also has upgrades and the coal power plant doesn't, which will provide you some flexibility for the future. So you're almost always better off going with a wind turbine if the option is available to you. And I say if the option is available to you because you might not have the wind to do it. And you can see that depending on where I move this, I can see the electricity production. And even on this hill, we're not seeing much in terms of wind. So I'm hoping that we've got a spot or 2 where this works. And it looks like offshore, we've actually got a decent amount of wind as well as really close to the edge of the map right here. I'm going to place a couple of these and immediately we'll hit milestone 1. And why don't we take a look at what we've unlocked? We've got $25,000, 1 development point, and 3 expansion permits to purchase other map tiles. If we go to our progression panel, we can see even more. We've increased our loan limit. We now have access to the city budget. We can adjust taxes. We can look at our city statistics, adjust our service budgets. We have row homes, vegetable farming, coal mining, which goes hand in hand with that coal power plant if we wanted to place it. And we've also got some new road options that we've unlocked as well. Now, a couple of interesting things. We now have healthcare and death care, and if you unlock it, you're going to need to place it sooner rather than later. Same thing with garbage management, garbage being one that we've really got to take care of right away. So good timing, we're placing utilities. So on that note, I think that 4 kilowatts of electricity is not enough, so we're going to place at least 2 of these. And now we need to connect the turbines to our city, so we'll do that by running an underground electric cable. Next up, let's build our water facilities, and we've got 4 options available here. So we've got the water pumping station, which can pump water from either the ocean or the river right here. There is no separation between salt and fresh water, so you don't have to worry about that. We've also got a water tower, a small water tower, and a groundwater pumping station. Now, I want to zero in on the groundwater pumping station for just a moment because this one's kind of unique. So if you were to select this, you could pump water out of an aquifer. But here's the thing, aquifers can get polluted, so you want to make sure that wherever you're pumping from is not going to be anywhere near an industrial district. Now on this map in particular, a lot of these aquifers are touching, which means that if one gets polluted, it's going to pollute a whole bunch. If you have polluted water, your citizens will get sick and everyone will die. It'll be bad. Now the water towers are a compelling option because they can be placed anywhere and they'll have a consistent water output. The thing is, they have incredibly high upkeep relative to other options. So for instance, the upkeep of this water pumping station is roughly 1/3 that of the water tower. So that said, the water pumping station does have employees, which means that there are monthly wages in addition to that upkeep. Now the small water tower right here is exactly half the upkeep and cost of the large water tower. And again, very similar to the groundwater pumping station, if you place this on an area that has ground pollution, you'll start to pump dirty water. You don't want to do that. So I think in most cases, the water pumping station is the right choice. It produces about 3 times the amount of water as the water tower, and it's much, much, much cheaper. So I think that we're going to place this in the river, and I'm going to place this very close to our bridge over here. And this needs both a water pipe and a road. So you might be convinced that maybe you got to add this water pipe. But if you add a road, the water pipes are built into the roads. So now you're all forced to place the water pipes underneath the road, right where they belong. Now, along with the water pipes being underneath the road, the power is underneath the road as well. So this facility is already connected to power, which is great. The other nice thing about this facility in particular is that it has an upgrade available if you need more water in the future. Now, one of the things I didn't point out is that we've got these arrows right here. And one of the reasons I wanted to place the water pipe up here is it is going to be upstream from any potential polluting uses. So if I wanted to place a sewage outlet on the river, if I place that over here, it's downstream of the water pump and there won't be any mixing of the pollutions. And in fact, I think that that's what I want to do. We'll place that right about here. Now for this one, you don't actually need to place a road. You could just place the sanitary sewer pipe, but it feels kind of strange to me to not have some sort of connection. So we'll just add this one right here. And again, sanitary sewer is built into the road, so that's connected as well. And then finally, we are going to need that landfill now that we've unlocked it. And for this, I want to make sure that we've got plenty of space to expand it in the future. And I think we're going to place that way out here. The landfills are found underneath garbage management, and right now it's the only option that we have available to us. Now keep in mind that this processes garbage really slowly, so until you have a recycling center or some other incinerator, you're going to kind of just be storing garbage. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to place it way out here. That little circle is the radius in which we can build our landfill storage area. So I want to maximize this. And there we go. Now I just need to grab some roads and run them to this facility. And you'll notice I ran Concord Lane all the way across the front of the building. The main reason for that is this particular asset has multiple access points at the front. If I wouldn't have run this here, I'd see a little car icon, and that means that one of the accesses to the building isn't accessible by a road. So if you see that, this is what you have to do. Now, I did run Olive Lane all the way to the Garland Highway, and generally that wouldn't be good enough to get power and water to jump. I do think that power is already serving this area though, and that's because on this map, there are lights on the highway here. Generally, that's an upgrade and it's already been done for us, which is really nice. But water and sanitary sewer are not here, so we'll need to make that connection. And the main reason those aren't there is highways don't have that enabled underneath the road by default. So we'll place these right underneath the road, right where they belong. And there we go. Now, 2 things I want to share. First and foremost, you got to really pay attention to your landfill. If you have a coal power plant in particular, it will need its garbage collected. The wind turbines don't. That's another advantage of them. And with a coal power plant in particular, if the garbage gets backed up, it will not be as productive and you will lose power to half your city and it can become a big mess. The same thing can happen with your water pumping stations. So it's really important that you never let your landfill back up and run out of capacity. Now, another thing I want to show you, if you just want this to look a little bit nicer, you can actually use your terrain tools within these surface areas. So let's say you want this to look like it's a bit fuller. You can shift the terrain up and then we can level this out. And rather than this looking totally flat, now you have the appearance that there's something happening in here. And I can even taper this at the edges. And I just think it looks a little bit nicer. Now, this exact same technique can be applied over here to our extractor building. And for this one, I'm going to shift it down. So I'm going to hit the right mouse button and that'll shift it way down, way further down than I wanted it to. And then we'll use our level terrain tool. I'm going to select a height that is much higher than this and we'll dig down. And now it seems as though we've been extracting from this area. Now, once again, extractors currently have unlimited extracting potential. So you don't necessarily need to worry about what's happening in here. This is really for visual effect. And there we go. I know that this isn't utilities, but I think it fits in well with this. And it makes this look a ton better. Now, with all of our utilities in place, we could begin to run this, but if we were to do so, we would still be losing money, and that's because none of these industries have any employees. So let's fix that by zoning our city and working our way through the game's progression. One of the interesting things about building a grid the way that we have is that we have basically built a city backwards. Most cities wouldn't be built with a fully fleshed out grid with appropriate roadway hierarchy. That would come after the fact. But because we have it, we can kind of figure out where specific uses might be best located. So I look at this and I see this major arterial cutting through the center of the city, meeting up with a collector right here. And it makes me think that this right here is really the center of the city. This is where everything is going to pulse from. So with that in mind, along these two collectors is where we're going to have most of our commercial and office activity. And within a few blocks of there, we'll have our row homes. And further from there, we'll have single family homes for the most part. And then for our industrial, we'll try to keep most of that right here near the interstate. Another consideration is that I'd like to have commercial along Sunnyside Street. One of the things that commercial generally demands is high vehicular traffic going by it or high foot traffic going by it, one of the two. So that makes Sunnyside Street an ideal place for commercial. So let's go ahead and get things zoning. And I want to figure out what we need to bridge in terms of our financial gap. And it looks like we need to make about $2,500 per hour, which should be relatively straightforward. Now, when you start zoning, there's a couple of things to have in mind. You've got two different themes and you can select one or both of them. But do know that even if you have two themes selected, you're not going to be able to combine them into one zoning category. You'll still have to select one at a time. And we have different themes for both residential and commercial zones. Industrial and office are just generic. So I'm going to begin with some commercial. And one thing you'll notice is that the street has a color. That light green means that commercial is viable on any street in the city. And we've got a couple of different tools we can use to fill in our zoning. We've got the fill tool. If we use this, it'll fill in the entire block with that zoning. The next tool is the marquee tool, where we can select an area to fill in with zoning. And then the final tool is the paint tool. And I'm going to be honest with you and say I never use this tool. You can fill in one zoning cell at a time. I don't really understand this tool. Now, if you ever want to delete zoning, go over the top of it with your right mouse button and you can remove it. Alternatively, if you just zone over the top of existing zoning, that will rezone it. Keep that in mind because you can create lots of problems for yourself inadvertently if you're not careful. Another thing to keep in mind is that the maximum width of a building in this game, at least for a zone building, is going to be 6 units deep. So if you want to maximize the size of your buildings, you'll go for a 6-unit deep lot. On the note about the size of buildings, one thing that you'll notice in this game, buildings are larger when you give them bigger lots. And if you give them smaller lots, you'll have shorter buildings that aren't quite as big. So keep that in mind, especially as you start zoning for higher density structures. Another thing to keep in mind is that there is not really a way to control zoning that is very automatic at this point in time. Zoning is going to occur generally on the street that is built first. However, you can fudge this a little bit, and if you delete buildings, you can see which street they're going to front based on the little opening right there for the construction vehicles. And if you click it a few times, sometimes you'll get it to front the correct street. And similar to the other delete tools, if you want to delete a whole bunch of stuff at once, click the delete button and move around. You can delete multiple buildings at once. Now I have all of these commercial buildings fronting Belmont Street, which is what I wanted to have happen. So we've been using a lot of North American low density business right here, but this is a downtown, so we really should be mixing uses. So why don't we add a bit of residential here? And this is a good opportunity to talk about the demand bar, because for residential, there are multiple demand bars. So the top bar is for low density residential, and it's completely separate from medium density residential. So if I build a bunch of North American low density residential, let's say I build that over here, this will have an impact on the top demand bar, but not the middle. The row homes will satisfy that demand. And with the row homes in particular, I like to leave a gap on the street that I don't want the buildings to front, and then I fill that in later. And I do that because then I can ensure that all the buildings are going to face in the correct direction. Now, let's say we have a situation like this, where maybe I didn't get my full 6 units of zoning and I really want it. A way that's easy to resolve this is to use your pathways. So for this, what I'm going to do is select snap to the sides of a building. In fact, I'll also have snap to 90-degree angles and snap to existing geometry, and I'll keep this perfectly straight. So the benefit of this is that you can see it completely straightened out our zoning. And you can use this in a variety of different ways. You can turn this off and just use it to control zoning. And this can come in really handy if you want to completely change the street that you're fronting. So let's say we don't want to front this street. Now the zoning will front this street. Now, sometimes when you delete the path, your zoning will revert. However, if your structures are built, this generally will not happen. And with that bit of zoning that I've done, I've completely exhausted all of my low density demand. So we need to start thinking about that industrial that I was mentioning earlier. What I think we're going to do is build our collector and have it run this way. And interestingly, if we connect up to the highway right here, we're actually going to turn this couplet into an arterial, since it'll be carrying regional traffic. Now, as much as I'd like to do something better than this strange at-grade crossing, there's not a lot that I can do right now because we don't have highways unlocked. And that's something that we'll have to unlock through our progression system, which is something I want to talk about right now. You'll notice that we are currently at level 1. You can see that down here, Tiny Village. We currently have 460 XP, and to reach our next milestone, it'll be 1,750 XP. Now, milestones are important because they unlock all of these things down here that have padlocks next to it, and they allow you to go into the development tree and start unlocking things that you might have interest in. Things like advanced road services, which will allow you to turn on and off traffic signals and add stoplights. But there are lots of other great things in here, like different types of power plants, additional water and sewage solutions, healthcare and death care options, and garbage management. Now, because we've only reached level 1, we have one development point available, and bluntly, I already know what I want to unlock. It's going to be the crematorium. And that's because the crematorium is cheaper and much more space efficient than the cemetery. So we are going to unlock this, though I'm not going to place it just yet. I'm going to hold out as long as we can until we see one of those symbols that says that we have a death care need. Now, on the note of XP, you gain XP both actively and passively. Actively by drawing roads and placing buildings, and passively by keeping your citizens happy over time. Now, down here, I want you to notice that I just turned the game speed up. If I hit 1, 2, or 3, I can change the game speed. And this might be something that you're interested in because it allows you to recoup some of that demand as things build out. So right into here, we can see that the median density demand has come back now that I've sped up time and things are moving a bit faster. But still, we've got to build some industrial, which is what we are going to focus on right now. So for this, what we're going to do is upgrade the roads over here, and then I'm going to try to mirror the coast one more time. And then I will actually want to parallel the highway. And the way that we're going to do that, or roughly parallel, I'm just going to attach to the highway, come a couple of units back, and run this parallel to the highway. And then we'll just get rid of that little nub right there. And now I don't want to attach to what is a fairly important corridor in our community. Instead, I'll attach to this local road. There we go. And I decided to straighten up this road so that we got a couple of larger lots to build on. So let's go ahead and zone some of our industrial. And thankfully, we planned ahead for this earlier, and we see that all the wind pollution will head down this way and it won't impact any of our residents. So we can build here without really worrying about it all that much. Now, one thing I want to point out is that I very specifically and deliberately chose the size of my lots because I wanted certain types of buildings to spawn. I wanted large factories to spawn right here, so I built 6x6 lots when I could. Right here, I wanted some small warehouse type buildings to occur, so I zoned 2x2 warehouses. And this is an example of what you can achieve when you zone things very deliberately. Now, we can apply this to all of our zoning districts, and I want to show you why you probably should. If you take a look at these blocks right here that I kind of randomly zoned in, the homes are facing in kind of bizarre directions. And we have strange things like this going on where we have these homes fronting Cypress Street, these ones fronting Evergreen, and these ones fronting Middle. And you can see that no matter what I do right here, I am not getting the lots to line up the way that I want to. Now, reasonably, if we would have been deliberate when we zoned this initially, we wouldn't be dealing with this sort of an issue, and now we have to take heavy-handed fixes to get this to work. First, of course, I could change my zoning and dezone it. The other option is to get rid of the streets, which seems incredibly extreme, but look at how easy it is for me to replace these streets, especially if I have the right snap twos on. Looks perfect. So I think for the rest of these, I'm going to try to control it by zoning the way that I want to up front. And to do that, I'll make sure that the ends are not zoned. We'll have a few homes fill in, and then we'll fill in the rest afterwards. And while I was zoning things in, we reached milestone 2, $50,000, 2 development points, and 3 expansion permits. We've also expanded our loan limit. We have access to our production panel, which we are absolutely going to want to take a look at. We have access to medium density housing now, textile farming, and some education and research options, including elementary and high schools. So we're going to want to start thinking about that as well. But again, we're going to sit tight for just a moment. Our budget is almost at an equilibrium, and there's a whole bunch of competing interests that we have. And right now, it just doesn't make a lot of sense to start building a bunch of stuff that we can't afford just yet. So what I would recommend is that we start to find out what we actually need. And right here, you can see someone's waiting for an ambulance and someone's waiting for a hearse. So if we're gonna spend money on things, those are the things I wanna spend money on. So let's do that. We'll go into our healthcare and death care. And you can see with the roads, right now there is 0 coverage in our community. We have 2 options for a clinic. We have our small medical clinic. This is $30,000, 3 ambulances, 25 patient capacity, $10,000 to $24,000 per month in upkeep. The medical clinic is much more expensive. It costs twice as much. It carries an extra 2 ambulances, and it can have up to 4 times as many patients. But beyond that, even though the upkeep is significantly higher, the medical clinic can be expanded. So the medical clinic is really going to grow with your community, and the small medical clinic is something that you might have when you're a small town, and maybe replace it down the line. I think because of the size of our community, because I want to keep things cheap, we're going to go with the small medical clinic, but I'm not going to be afraid to call a mulligan on this thing in the future. Because this is a trip generating use, I don't want to place this directly on an arterial, but I want to have close access to one. So we're going to place this thing right off Spruce Street, which has direct access to Sunnyside Street, which is our main drag. And it's really hard for me to remember Sunnyside Street, so let's rename this. So I'm just going to click on the street, and I can go up here and rename this. There we go. So now immediately, this building is in operation. We see ambulances being deployed, and some of those icons that we had are now going away, which is fantastic. We also need some death care. That's in the same menu under death care. And like I mentioned earlier, the cemetery is significantly more expensive than the crematorium. Though it has a ton of capacity, you get 15 hearses here, you get 10 right here. But ultimately, the reason I like the crematorium more is it has a slightly less overall upkeep, even though it has more employees. It's more space efficient, and the processing capacity and number of hearses are upgradable. That said, the cemetery has upgrades that increase attractiveness of the cemetery, and it acts like a park, increasing the well-being of those in close proximity. So there are benefits to both of them. Now, this does generate a bit of air pollution, so keep that in mind. I think that we will place this behind these commercial buildings right here on Vermont. Now, I want this to feel like a finished, cohesive campus, and the way that I'll do that is I will adjust the surfaces, and I'm going to add my own. So I'll add a grass surface right here. And in my opinion, that looks a ton more complete, and after adding just a couple of trees, it'll look even better. Now let's add some more of our medium density buildings. And since we reached milestone 2, we now have medium density residential. So if I go and I place a bunch of row homes, it's impacting that medium density bar. If I place one of these medium density housing buildings, which I will do, I'll place one right here. We'll rezone this property just by going over the top. That is also impacting that bar. And you can see it immediately drop down. Let's extend this a bit further, and we'll bring this a few blocks back. And doing that completely exhausted 100% of our medium density demand. Now I'm going to use some of our beachfront properties and try to make sure that our beaches are filled with properties fronting them, because you can see that this did not work right. We've got all of the properties facing the wrong streets. And then we'll rezone, but we'll do so deliberately just like before. And And now we've reached milestone 3, $75,000, 3 development points, and 5 expansion permits. So we are really progressing through the game's early milestones quickly. Now do know it slows down because things get exponentially more expensive in terms of XP, but in the beginning you will breeze through these things. In our progression panel, we've now increased our loan limit. We now have ore mining, fire and rescue, police and administration. So very important things that we're going to need in short order. I want to slow things down for just a moment and talk a little bit about our budget because we are still not at an equilibrium. And as we add more services, we're only going to slip further back. We can go into our taxation and bump taxes up if we want to. What I've seen is that for residential, they prefer 10%, but they'll deal with 12%. For commercial and industrial, they prefer 10%, but they'll deal with 12% without complaining. And you can go even higher than that. And then for office, it seems like 8 or 9% is the sweet spot. If you go above that to 10, 11, 12, you start to kill your office demand. We don't have it unlocked yet, so it doesn't really matter to us, but that is something that we'll want to keep in mind in the future. And you can see that bumping up our taxes just a little bit has helped us narrow that gap, which is fantastic. And on that budgetary note, we've unlocked a ton of expansion permits. Now, one thing that's interesting about this map is because it's a custom map, we already have some of those expansion permits applied to our area already, so we don't have to worry about those. But if you are playing on a vanilla map and you get expansion permits, don't buy map tiles unless you need them. It will completely destroy your budget. The tile upkeep can be really expensive if you're not working the tiles. Speaking of things that we need, I think we need our elementary school, and I'm going to break the grid to add one. And I think that we'll basically take this block right here with Main Street, Sheffield Street, Dean Street, and Cypress, and I will sever that right there. We've got a couple of different school options now. We've got our small elementary school, capacity of 400, but with expansion buildings that you can use to grow your elementary school capacity. We've also got a normal elementary school. This one costs significantly more in terms of not just the upfront cost. This one's $40,000. This one's $100,000, but also in terms of the upkeep. The building itself costs more than twice as much, and you're going to have 15 employees here, and it's going to be very expensive. So we will begin with just a small elementary school. Now for our elementary school, I mentioned that we have some upgrades. We could add an extension wing for another 100 students, but this would also add to our employees number and the wages that we pay them. We also have this gymnasium upgrade, but to get this, we need to unlock some parks, which we haven't done just yet. And adding amenities like a school will really start to supercharge your demand again. So we are going to zone some things very, very rapidly through this area. Now, interestingly, as I started to zone more in the industrial park, we started to run out of power, and that is going to be a significant problem for us. One of the things I really love about the wind turbines is that they have upgrades. This is something that the small coal power plant doesn't have. So we can add a solar assist, a advanced rotary system, and a battery extension so that we can back up some power, particularly if we have the solar assist. So I'm going to add these and try to make up our deficit right there. And you can see that that has resolved our power problems. If you're wondering how much power we actually have and what we need, clicking on our info views and going to electricity will show you. And you can see that we are just producing a little bit more than we are actually using. So this is going to become a problem again. I'm going to pay for additional upgrades. I think we'll get the solar assist and the battery backup. And interestingly, between the two of these, this is now approximately just a little bit less power than we get from the coal power plant, and we don't have to pay for any coal or employees, which is fantastic. Now, this little symbol right here tells me that we are now having crimes committed, so we have to start thinking about a police station. So we are going to place a small police station. This has a relatively low jail capacity, but 6 patrol cars, as opposed to the slightly higher jail capacity and 6 patrol cars of the larger police station. The big thing, though, is there are fewer employees in a smaller police station, although there are no upgrades. So this will cost you a lot less monthly, but eventually you'll probably need to replace the whole building with a small police station. I think that maybe we'll add this near our clinic and have the start of a little city services complex right here. Now, let's say you don't like the location of this building and you want to move it. I want to just warn you to be really careful with that. If you don't have a mod like Move It and you go to move this building, this will actually cost me $19,000 to relocate this. So if you're not quite satisfied with the location and you don't have a lot of money, maybe pump the brakes, because you don't want to spend that money if you don't have to. Now, this is only going to send our budget further in the red, so why don't we take a look at our production chain view, which we unlocked at milestone 2, to see if there's anything there that we can improve to make more money. So you can see that we currently have a major surplus of everything that we built earlier, but we have deficits of both oil and vegetables. So if we wanted to kind of bridge the gap a bit, we could build a vegetable farm, and that will lower costs for our businesses while also giving us some export income. And I think that we'll build this near our other farms, again, looking at the topography. And for this one, I think that we'll build it kind of like this. And as we finish up our farm, we unlock Grand Village, $100,000, 4 more development points, and 6 more expansion permits. Looking at our progression panel, we get our district tool finally, more loans, some policies, natural disasters, low rent housing, which is actually a high density building. We get offices for the first time. We get oil drilling, which is the other industry that we could place if we wanted to complete our industries. We also get mass transportation and parks, which is fantastic. And if you have the pre-order bonus pack, you unlock all the pre-order bonuses here as well. We also get the option to import city services, and this is basically everything like fire, police, health, death care. Don't enable this policy when your city is small. You'll go bankrupt. Now, I want to round things out by adding a fire station, and we've got this firehouse and then an urban firehouse. It's interesting. The urban firehouse is actually a better value in terms of the number of fire engines you get and the upkeep per month, but it's not really appropriate from an architectural standpoint. It's a few stories tall. It kind of feels very out of scale relative to the rest of our community, whereas the firehouse seems to fit. So even though this is more expensive, in this one instance, I think I'm going to let architecture win the day. The nice thing about this is, unlike the urban fire station, this one does have upgrades, and our upgrade would increase the number of fire engines that we have here by 4. So this does future-proof us a bit more. But adding more services has only put more pressure on our budget. But we have a solution: building parks and recreation services, which will cause our buildings to level up and generate more tax revenue. So you can tell right now, our leisure availability throughout the entire city is really bad. So adding one simple park will make a huge difference in these neighborhoods. So that's what I want to do. We're going to build everyone's favorite first. Everyone loves a dog park, so we will absolutely build one of these. $2,000 per month in upkeep, but you will get that back in terms of buildings leveling and tax collection, so you might as well do it. And everyone loves that. That's why we get the star. Now I'm going to add a few more parks. I think in our main corridor right here, I'm going to add a couple of these small parks. And one thing you might notice is that I really want to center this, but it's really difficult to do so. First of all, I'm going to close that window so I can see what I'm doing. And then I turned off all of my snapping, and I can move this around. And I can even pull the park out a little bit further and place it where I feel it is best to be placed. And compare that to this other park over here, I think that the placement is much more appropriate. And in my opinion, just adding those grass surfaces really makes a huge difference here, and cleaning up some of this landscaping will do the rest of the job for us. Now, again, it's starting to close the gap. As we add services, we start to increase our tax collections, and that is really what we're looking for. Next up, though, what I think we're going to do is add a bit of office zoning. Now, offices benefit from being close to major roads, but not necessarily on them. Visibility isn't quite as big of a concern as it is for commercial, which is why it's okay to set these back a little ways. And then the final zoning category that we've unlocked that we haven't used is actually another housing category, and that is low rent housing. Now, interestingly, low rent housing is the one housing category that only has a generic model. So whether I have European or North American selected, it's just low rent housing. So for the low rent housing, what we're going to do is place this kind of close to the action. What you're getting in return for having a smaller apartment is more amenities. The one thing I want to point out is that right here, I didn't zone all the way back, and I would encourage you not to fall into the trap of doing so. You can definitely zone just a couple of cells deep and fill in the rest of it with surfaces, and make it feel like there's a yard. Now, let's say you want these to feel like separate properties. Maybe grab different surfaces. So right here, I've gone with the first grass surface 1. And then for this other one, I'll go with the other grass surface 2. And there you go. With the different grass surfaces and the landscaping, it feels like these are separate parcels and part of different developments, which is what we were going for. I want to point out one thing. We are now in the green. It's not super green, but we are in the green. A big reason why this happened is we were patient and we didn't take out loans. I highly recommend that, especially early on in the game, you hold back from taking out loans. They're one of the very best ways to bankrupt yourself. And especially early on, the moment you unlock a signature building, be sure to use it because they're 100% free and they provide massive benefits to your city. This one, for instance, the real estate agent's mansion, adds +2 well-being within 500 meters. If I were min-maxing, I'd place this right in the center. If I were placing it realistically, I'd probably place it at the end of this cul-de-sac right here. With that, we have the bones of our little city of Newport, but I think we've got to fill things in before we leave things off for the day. So let's quickly zone in the rest of the city. And there we go. And I think that looks absolutely fantastic. Shows what a bit of orderly zoning and some landscaping and detailing can do. Now, if you're building along with me, this is what the overall zoning picture looks like. In our downtown area, we have a healthy mix of uses with higher density residential around here, along with offices and commercial. Along Main Street, we again have a bit more density, some offices and commercial. And then at a couple key locations, we've started to increase our density along the shore, since these would likely be highly sought after areas. Now, while we were doing that, we did hit milestone 5, and this brings with it 5 new development points, 7 new tiles, $125,000, another increase in our loan limit, mixed-use housing, and a couple of new services, including communication services like the internet, radio mast, and the post office. We also get some new policies, and those are all things that we'll have to dive into in the next one. And would you look at our financial trend? We are absolutely in the green, and I think we're going to stay here from here on out. And with that, there's only one more thing left to do. That's take inventory of what we've done with a brief city tour. And with that, we've explored the basics of city building in Cities Skylines 2, and I hope that I've demonstrated how to build a small city with a positive budget. Now, this is the first in a number of videos that are going to come in this series exploring all sorts of topics in Cities Skylines 2. And if you've enjoyed this episode, I think you're going to enjoy the next ones as well. So please consider subscribing so you see those episodes as they come out. But for today, I think we're going to leave it here, and I really hope that you've enjoyed this one. If you did, please hit the like button. If you're not subscribed to the channel, please consider doing so. We have lots of content like this, other Cities Skylines videos, and other city builder videos as well. So once again, thank you so much for joining me today. There's a million things that you could have been doing. You decided to hang out with me and play some Cities Skylines 2, and I appreciate you. Thank you so much. Take care. Bye-bye.